First Cumberland Presbyterian Church. This is our worship service for Sunday, August 27th. A couple of things that are coming up this week. Tonight, or on August 27th, we'll be having the blessing of the animals out on the front lawn here at the church. It's always a great time. I'm hoping that 6 o'clock it will be cool enough to have our pets out. But please bring your animals out and we'll have a chance to meet one another. I'll have treats and water bowls, and we'll have a short service with a little bit of singing and a short message. And then I'll be able to anoint all of our pets with oil and let them know how much they're loved, not only by you, but by our whole community. So I hope that you'll take advantage of that. As soon as that's over, we're going to go into our youth group meeting. We are studying the Confession of Faith right now, and we've only gotten just started. So if you missed one, that's okay. Bring your youth along. We're going to be getting into that as soon as the blessing of the animals is over. And then on Wednesday night, we're going to be starting the study on the Gospel of Matthew. We were going to start this past week. We weren't able to do it. We're going to start now this coming week. So if you thought, oh no, I missed the first week, you haven't. You're going to be able to come. You're going to not be behind at all. You're going to know everything we know, which may not be much, at least as far as I'm concerned. But I do the best I can. So come and see us on Wednesday night for that. And then if you know anybody who's trying to work on their English, send them to Andrea's English as a Second Language class that starts at 6 o'clock on Wednesdays. And of course, choir is at 7 o'clock on Wednesdays. And then next week is Labor Day Sunday, and so I hope that you are not going out of town. If you are, I hope you have a great time. But if you're not going out of town, come and be with us, and we'll have a wonderful time of worship. And just a reminder that on the Monday after Labor Day, the church office will be closed. And now let's turn to our scripture for today. It comes from the book of Exodus, chapter 1, verses 8 through chapter 2, verse 10. It says this: Now a new king arose over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, Look, the Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase, and in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us, and escape from the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built supply cities, Pithom and Ramesses, for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians became ruthless in imposing tasks on the Israelites, and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick, and in every kind of field labor. They were ruthless in all the tasks that they imposed on them. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, and the other Puah, When you act as midwives to the Hebrew women, and see them on the birth stool, if it is a boy, kill him, but if it is a girl, she shall live. But the midwives feared God. They did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, Why have you done this and allowed the boys to live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very strong. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, Every boy that is born to the Hebrews you shall throw into the Nile, but you shall let every girl live. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him, and plastered it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her attendants walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. This must be one of the Hebrews' children, she said. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, Shall I go and get a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you? Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Yes. So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, She brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she took him as her son. She named him Moses, because, she said, I drew him out of the water. A long road. I wonder how many of you out there have seen or read the Hunger Games series. Now, your first thought might be that a book series like that has nothing to do with our scripture, and I would understand. The premise of the book is that there was this large society in North America, and some catastrophe had happened, and now there's a ruling class and a peasant class. And the ruling class, called the capital, had power and weapons and money, and the peasants were dispersed among several districts. Each district was assigned part of the economy, always toiling for the comfort of the ruling class, the capital. Some were miners, some made electronics, some farmed, but none of the districts had enough food or currency. They didn't even have extra of whatever their own commodity was. All of it went to the ruling class. The districts rose up against the rulers, but because of the imbalance of military power, they were defeated. And so then, in order to control the districts for the future, they instituted something called the Hunger Games. In the Hunger Games, every year, 2 children from each district would be chosen to represent their district in a fight to the death with the children from the other districts. All of this was televised, and only one child would survive. And every year it was stated that these games were a reminder to the districts that they could never overpower the rulers, the capital. They had to go through these games to understand their proper place in society. The more I think about it, the more this story resembles the story of the Israelites at the beginning of the book of Exodus. Now, in last week's sermon, I mentioned that Joseph was put in charge of the food collection during the years of plenty and for the distribution during the years there was famine. And I said specifically that Joseph was doing this on behalf of the government. What isn't usually read in worship, because it's not in the lectionary, is what happened as a result of Joseph's work for the government, the ruling power. Hear these words from Genesis chapter 47, verses 13 through 20. Now there was no food in all the land, for the famine was very severe. The land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. Joseph collected all the money to be found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan in exchange for the grain that they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. When the money from the land of Egypt and from the land of Canaan was spent, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? Our money is gone." And Joseph answered, "Give me your livestock, and I will give you food in exchange for your livestock if your money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the herds, and the donkeys. That year, he supplied them with food in exchange for all their livestock. When that year was ended, they came to him the following year and said to him, "We cannot hide from my lord that our money is all spent, and the herds of cattle are my lord's. There is nothing left in the sight of my lord but our bodies and our lands. Shall we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land in exchange for food. We with our land will become slaves to Pharaoh. Just give us seed so that we may not die and that the land may not become desolate." So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. When the people ran out of food, they traded their money. Then they traded their livestock. They traded their land, and eventually they traded their own freedom for the food that Joseph had stored up for them. And so by the end of the time of Joseph, all the people of Egypt and Canaan had become property of the Egyptian government. It turns out that for a long time, the government didn't treat them quite as badly as we might expect. There are many different estimates of the amount of time that passed between the end of Joseph's life and the new Pharaoh at the beginning of the book of Exodus that comes to power. But it seems to have been about 400 years. And in that time, the memory of Joseph and the salvation that he brought to the land seemed to have kept things in balance. But this new king had a problem that many have had throughout history. He feared people who were not like him. He feared the Israelites because he thought they would want to take power from him. What were his choices with this fear? Well, he could have sent them away. But then he wouldn't have the source of labor that he thought he needed, so he felt like he couldn't do that. He could have allied with them better, maybe even intermarried, I don't know. But instead, he chose to oppress them so badly that they would never think they had a chance against the government. See, he had all the power, all the money, all the land, all the military. There was no hope of overpowering the Egyptians. But as hard as he oppressed them, the Israelites just continued to grow in numbers and strength. And eventually, he resorted to trying to decrease their numbers by killing their children when they were born, innocent babies. These are the same tactics used by the capital in the Hunger Games. Oppress as much as possible. And if you need to show more force, do so by killing their children. The Israelites cried out to God. It's hard to say how long they cried out, but we know at least that they had been sorely oppressed from the time of Moses' birth to the time Moses came back to Egypt to lead the people into their own land. And we know how old Moses was when he was put in the basket in the water, and he finally confronted Pharaoh when he was 80 years old. So that whole time, at least 80 years, the people were oppressed, crying out to God, waiting for deliverance from this oppressive regime. In the Hunger Games, when the people finally start to get the courage to stand up against the government, it's been 75 years since the Hunger Games were instituted. Now, why so long? Why does it take people so long? It was definitely a long road for the Israelites. I wonder how many of them actually saw their children thrown into the river, or how many of them died because of the oppressive nature of their labor, or how many of them died because they alone had the courage to stand up and fight back, and they were killed to make an example. It's impossible to say. And so what is the reason for the delay? I don't know. See, I see things around the world almost every day that I want to question God about. Why did this happen? How come you allowed this? Why did this person succeed when someone else would have been better? What about these medical conditions that hurt so many people every day? Sometimes our journeys in life seem like a really long road. And none of these things negate the promises that God has given us, all the way back to Abraham. And really before, God promised those who serve God that God would be in covenant with us. God would care for us. God would be with us. Sometimes it may seem like we're on our own, as if God has left us and forgotten about us. I am sure that's how the Israelites felt during those days in the land of Egypt. What they couldn't see is that God was arranging for their deliverance even then. Actually, if we look back into the Genesis text, we could argue God was arranging for the deliverance of the Israelites when Joseph was sold into slavery, or when Jacob was meeting Rachel and Leah in Haran, or when Rebekah came to marry Isaac, or when Abraham was called out of the land of Ur to a land that God would show him. Now, this doesn't wipe away the tears and the toil and the sadness of the intervening years, and those things are important. They are not to be overlooked. How much of that was God's plan, and how much is the mistake of humanity, I couldn't begin to guess. But I do think that if we can see the long road of the Israelites, we can see that God was preparing them for their deliverance long before they were aware that they would need that deliverance. We have sorrow in our lives, We have ups and downs on our roads. Sometimes the ups are prominent, and sometimes the downs seem like they'll never go away. God remains with us through all of that. God holds on to us through all of that. There are things that happen in our lives that I would never be arrogant enough to pretend I understand. Things that hurt us, things that take people from us, things that throw us off our track. I don't know how much of those things are God's plan or simply the mistakes we make as humans. Maybe they're mistakes others have made that we end up paying a price for. Those are things that are probably impossible to understand unless you're God. But I do believe that God is there planning redemption from the beginning. I wish I could say redemption will come the moment we ask for it. It might, but it may take some time. Either way, God is there willing to restore us to health and life and contentment. Finally, in the Hunger Games, enough people have become overwhelmed with the way society works, and they rise up again. Now, the author doesn't reference God in the story, but the parallels between that series of books and the book of Exodus are striking to me, and I think maybe sometimes it just helps us to see a biblical story in a different light. But I know that what I believe is God is there. God is with us even in the struggles. God is with us when we're hurt and feel alone. God is with us when we are lost and trying to find our way. God is with us when we feel oppressed or when our strength has run out. And if I am right, God has been planning for our restoration longer than we have known we would ever need it. It probably sounds simplistic to say, when we're down, we need to trust in God and trust that God will be there for us through our lows. But I really believe it's true. God will restore us in God's way. The hardest part about those rough times is wading through them, right? But when we know that God is there to restore us, we can continue to have hope. We can continue to believe in ourselves, and we can continue to believe in God to save us. And that'll just maybe get us out of that last low and into our next high. I pray these things for you and me as we continue to be baffled and overwhelmed and struggle through the difficult days in our lives and reach toward the days of highs and glory and wonder. May God be with you, as I know God will. Amen.